Michael Schneider had always considered himself a rational man. At 34 years old, he had built a respectable life as a software engineer for a mid-sized tech company in downtown Toronto. His apartment in the Distillery District wasn't lavish, but it was his, a clean, minimalist space that reflected his organized mind. Everything in Michael's life had its place, its purpose, its predictable pattern. That predictability extended to his relationship with Sarah Fisher. They had met 2 years earlier at a mutual friend's barbecue in High Park. Sarah, 28 at the time, had caught his attention immediately, not just because of her striking appearance, with her auburn hair and green eyes, but because of the way she carried herself. She seemed genuinely interested when he talked about his work, asked intelligent questions, and didn't immediately check her phone every 5 minutes like so many people their age did. Their courtship had been what Michael would describe as sensible. They had compatible interests, hiking, trying new restaurants, binge-watching Nordic noir series on cold winter nights. Sarah worked as a graphic designer for an advertising agency, and their schedules aligned well enough that they could see each other 3 or 4 times a week. It wasn't the passionate, all-consuming romance depicted in movies, but Michael had never believed in that kind of intensity anyway. This was real life, and real life required stability, trust, and mutual respect. Or so he thought. The first crack in his carefully constructed reality appeared on a Thursday evening in early February. Michael had finished work early and decided to surprise Sarah with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant. He had a key to her apartment in Liberty Village. She'd given it to him 6 months into their relationship, a gesture he'd interpreted as a sign of deepening commitment. When he let himself in, calling out her name, he was greeted by silence. Her laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, the screen still illuminated. Sarah had clearly left in a hurry. Her coffee mug was still half full, and her jacket was draped over a chair rather than hung properly in the closet, which was unlike her. Michael set the food down and walked over to close her laptop, a considerate gesture to save the battery. But as his hand reached for the screen, he froze. The browser was open to her Instagram messages. He shouldn't have looked. He knew that. In 2 years together, Michael had never snooped through Sarah's phone or computer. He believed in privacy, in trust, in respecting boundaries. But something about the open conversation thread caught his eye, specifically the profile picture of the person she'd been messaging. The name at the top read Alex Braun, and the profile photo showed someone with distinctive features, long dark hair, expertly applied makeup, and a confident smile. The most recent messages were from just minutes ago. Alex: I can't wait to see you tonight. It's been too long. Sarah: I know, baby. I'm leaving now. Em thinks I'm at a work dinner. Alex: You're still going to tell him, right? We talked about this. Sarah: Soon. I promise. I just need to find the right time. Michael's hand trembled as he scrolled up, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The conversation went back months, dozens, maybe hundreds of messages, pet names, heart emojis, plans for secret meetings, references to shared intimate moments that made Michael's stomach turn. But what disturbed him most wasn't just the affair itself. It was the way Sarah discussed him in these messages, Em or sometimes Michael, like he was an inconvenience to be managed, a problem to be solved eventually, but not today, never today. Alex: You deserve to be happy, Sarah, with someone who really sees you. Sarah: He's not a bad person. He's just safe, predictable. Sometimes I feel like I'm suffocating. Alex: Then breathe with me, leave him, be with me, be yourself. The dates on the messages told a story that rewrote every memory Michael had of the past year. That weekend trip to Montreal Sarah had taken with her college friends. She'd been with Alex. The nights she'd claimed to be working late on client projects. Meeting Alex, the gradual decrease in physical intimacy between them that Sarah had attributed to stress at work. She'd been getting that intimacy elsewhere. Michael sat down heavily in one of Sarah's kitchen chairs, the Thai food forgotten, cooling in its plastic containers. His mind raced through every interaction they'd had recently, reinterpreting them through this new, devastating lens. Had she ever really loved him? Or had he been nothing more than a placeholder, a safe backup, while she explored something that excited her more? He kept scrolling, unable to stop himself, even though each new message felt like a knife, twisting deeper. The conversations revealed a relationship that had started innocently enough. Sarah and Alex had met at an LGBTQ+ community event that Sarah had attended to support a friend. Alex was transitioning, the messages revealed, and Sarah had initially offered support as an ally. But somewhere along the way, support had become attraction, and attraction had become something deeper. Michael had no problem with Sarah's sexuality or her attraction to someone who was trans. What shattered him was the deception, the double life, the casual dismissal of their entire relationship as something merely safe and predictable, as if those qualities he'd thought were virtues were actually damning flaws. His phone buzzed in his pocket, making him jump. A text from Sarah. "Hey babe, work dinner running late, don't wait up, love you." The casual lie, delivered so smoothly, almost made him laugh. How many times had she sent him similar messages while actually being with Alex? How many times had he replied with understanding, with support, with love, completely unaware that he was participating in his own betrayal? Michael took a screenshot of the Instagram conversation, then another and another. He didn't know why, maybe as evidence, maybe just to prove to himself later that this nightmare was real. Then he closed the laptop carefully, exactly as he'd found it. He left the Thai food on the counter. Let her explain that to Alex. Over the next few days, Michael descended into a hell of his own making. He didn't confront Sarah immediately. Instead, he began to investigate, to piece together the full scope of her deception. He created a fake Instagram profile using a stock photo and a generic name, Mark Williams, bland and forgettable. From this anonymous vantage point, he studied Alex Braun's social media presence. Alex's Instagram was semi-public, showing a life lived boldly and authentically. Photos of art gallery visits, concerts, political protests. In several recent posts, there were subtle hints: a second coffee cup in frame, a shadow of another person, a caption that read, "Exploring the city with my favorite person." Sarah would have seen these. She would have known her image might be visible in the background of some shots, carefully cropped out, but present nonetheless. What struck Michael most was how different Alex's life seemed from his own. Where Michael was methodical and careful, Alex appeared spontaneous and passionate. Where Michael's Instagram, when he remembered to post, showed polished, filtered images of meals and sunsets, Alex's feed was raw and real, imperfect photos, unfiltered thoughts, messy humanity on display. Is this what Sarah wanted? This chaos, this authenticity, this departure from the predictable safety of their relationship? Michael's investigation expanded. He checked Sarah's location history on the Find My Friends app they'd set up for safety purposes. Another gesture he'd thought showed trust and care. The little dots on the map told stories of lies. Sarah's phone, placing her at Alex's address in Parkdale on nights she'd claimed to be at the office, at the gym, at her mother's house. He felt like a detective piecing together a crime, except he was both the investigator and the victim. Every new piece of evidence should have made it easier to confront her, to end things, to walk away with his dignity intact. But instead, it just made him angrier, more confused, more desperate to understand how this had happened. How had he missed it? The rational part of Michael's brain knew he should simply confront Sarah, end the relationship, and move on. But another part, a part he didn't fully recognize or understand, needed to know more, needed to see Alex, to understand what had drawn Sarah away from him. Needed, perhaps, to confront them both, to make them acknowledge what they'd done to him. On the 6th day after his discovery, Michael's fake profile tried to follow Alex Braun. The request was denied within hours. He tried again with a different fake account, this time using a female identity, thinking it might be less suspicious. That request was also denied. Then, that evening, his original fake account, Mark Williams, received a message from Alex Braun. "I don't know who you are, but I know you're not real. Stop trying to follow me. If this is about Sarah, grow up and talk to her like an adult." So Alex knew about him. Of course Alex knew. They'd probably laughed about his ignorance, his trusting nature, his pathetic attempts to play detective. Michael tried to respond, but the message wouldn't send. Alex had blocked him, or rather had blocked his fake profile. When he checked from his real account, he found that Alex had also blocked Michael Schneider. Sarah must have given Alex his information, warned him that Michael might try to reach out. The blocking felt like a final insult, a door slammed in his face. Not only had they betrayed him, but now they were shutting him out, refusing him even the dignity of confrontation. He was being erased from Sarah's life, and Alex was the one doing the erasing. That night, unable to sleep, Michael lay in bed staring at the ceiling. His rational mind screamed at him to let it go, to accept that Sarah had made her choice, to move forward with his life. But a louder, darker voice whispered something else entirely. If they wouldn't let him into their world digitally, he would enter it physically. He would go to Alex. He would make them face him. He would make them explain, apologize, acknowledge what they'd done. Michael Schneider had always been a rational man, but in that moment, in the darkness of his apartment with the sound of traffic muffled by winter snow outside his window, rationality felt like a prison he needed to escape. He picked up his phone and began searching for flights from Toronto to whatever city Alex Braun called home. Because one way or another, they were going to have this conversation. The address wasn't hard to find. Alex Braun's Instagram location tags, despite the blocked profile, had left breadcrumbs visible through Sarah's old posts. Posts she'd forgotten to delete. Chicago. Wicker Park neighborhood, a vintage apartment building on North Darman Avenue. Michael booked a flight for the following Thursday under the pretense of a work conference. His boss barely questioned it. Michael had always been reliable, never took unnecessary time off, and had accumulated weeks of unused vacation days. One long weekend in Chicago seemed reasonable. What wasn't reasonable was what he packed in his carry-on bag alongside clothes and toiletries. He told himself he just wanted to talk, to understand, to hear directly from Alex why his relationship had been worth destroying. But as he carefully wrapped a kitchen knife in a towel and placed it at the bottom of his luggage, he knew he was lying to himself. The knife was just in case. In case of what, exactly? Michael didn't want to answer that question. Sarah noticed nothing. Their interactions had become performative, forced smiles over breakfast, perfunctory good-night kisses, conversations about nothing important. She was relieved he realized that he seemed distant. It made her own deceptions easier. On his last night before the trip, Sarah told him she'd be staying at a friend's place that weekend. "Melissa is going through a breakup," she explained, not meeting his eyes. "She needs support." Michael nodded. Melissa didn't exist, or if she did, she wasn't the one Sarah would be comforting. "That's kind of you," he said, his voice flat. "You're a good friend." At O'Hare International Airport, Michael felt disconnected from reality, like he was watching himself from outside his body. He rented a car, a nondescript grey sedan, and drove into the city as evening fell. Chicago's skyline glittered against the darkening sky, beautiful and indifferent. He found Alex's building easily. It was exactly as it appeared in Instagram photos, a 3-story brick structure with large windows, the kind of place artists and young professionals gravitated toward. Warm light glowed from several apartments. Which one was Alex's? Michael parked across the street and waited. At 8:47 p.m., he saw them. Alex emerged from the building's entrance, laughing at something on their phone. They wore a vintage leather jacket and moved with easy confidence. In person, Alex was more striking than in photos, taller than Michael had imagined, with an energy that seemed to fill the space around them. And behind Alex, hurrying to catch up, was Sarah. Michael's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. Sarah looked happier than he'd seen her in months. She caught up to Alex, linked their arms together, and they walked down the street toward what looked like a restaurant district. The rational voice in Michael's head was screaming now, begging him to start the car and drive back to the airport. But that voice was drowning in something darker, a rage so pure and overwhelming that it felt almost cleansing. He reached into his bag and felt the weight of the knife. Michael followed them for 3 blocks, maintaining distance. They entered a small Italian restaurant, the kind with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. Through the window, he watched them sit at a corner booth, saw Alex reach across the table to hold Sarah's hand. The knife felt heavy in his jacket pocket. He'd transferred it there before leaving the car, telling himself it was for protection in an unfamiliar city. But protection from what? From whom? He waited outside for 90 minutes, pacing, chain-smoking cigarettes he'd bought from a corner store despite having quit 2 years ago. Other couples passed him, laughing, oblivious. The February cold bit through his coat, but he barely felt it. When they finally emerged, Sarah kissed Alex on the sidewalk, long, passionate, public. No one stared. No one cared. This was their life, real and tangible, while his entire existence had been a lie. They walked back toward Alex's apartment building, arms around each other. Michael followed, his heart hammering, his mind cycling through scenarios. He would confront them. He would demand answers. He would make them see what they'd done. But as they reached the building's entrance, Alex suddenly stopped and turned around. Their eyes met across the street. "Michael!" Alex called out, recognition flashing across their face. "What the hell are you doing here?" Sarah froze, her face draining of color. "Oh my God, Michael!" He crossed the street slowly, deliberately. His hand was in his pocket, fingers wrapped around the knife handle. "We need to talk." "You followed us to Chicago." Sarah's voice rose, a mix of shock and anger. "Are you insane?" Alex stepped slightly in front of Sarah, protective. "You need to leave, now, before I call the police." "Call them," Michael heard himself say. His voice sounded strange, disconnected. "Tell them how you destroyed my life. Tell them how you stole my girlfriend while I was trusting, while I was faithful, while I was being the safe, predictable fool." "Michael, please," Sarah began, but Alex cut her off. "She doesn't owe you anything. She made a choice. Accept it and move on like an adult." The word adult triggered something. Michael pulled out his phone with his free hand, his other still gripping the knife in his pocket. "I have screenshots, every message, every lie, every time you laughed about me behind my back." "I never laughed," Sarah started. "He's suffocating me," Michael quoted, his voice breaking. "He's just safe, predictable. That's what you said. After 2 years, after I gave you everything." A few passers-by had stopped, sensing drama. Someone had their phone out, recording. Alex's expression shifted from defensive to concerned. "Look, man, I get that you're hurt, but showing up here like this isn't okay. You need to go home and process this like a rational person." "Rational?" Michael laughed bitterly. "I've been rational my whole life. Where did that get me?" His hand tightened on the knife. One pull, and everything would change. They would know his pain. They would understand what they'd taken from him. But then he saw Sarah's face. Genuine fear mixed with something else. Pity. She pitied him. That broke something inside Michael. Not in the way that leads to violence, but in the way that leads to clarity. They weren't worth it. this rage, this darkness he'd been feeding, it would destroy him, not them. They'd move on, live their lives, maybe feel guilty for a while. But he'd be the one in prison, the one who'd thrown away everything for a moment of vengeful satisfaction. Slowly, Michael released the knife and pulled his empty hand from his pocket. "You're right," he said quietly. "I should go home." He turned and walked away, leaving them standing in shocked silence. Behind him, he heard Sarah calling his name, but he didn't turn back. In his rental car, Michael sat for a long time, staring at nothing. Then he pulled out the knife, looked at it in the dim light, and wondered who he'd almost become. Michael drove aimlessly through Chicago streets for hours, the knife still on the passenger seat like an accusation. Every stoplight felt like a judgment, every passing police car a potential end to his freedom. What had he been thinking? What had he almost done? At 2 a.m. he finally returned to his hotel near O'Hare, a generic chain property he'd chosen specifically for its anonymity. In his room, he sat on the edge of the bed and opened his phone. 17 missed calls from Sarah. 12 text messages. Sarah: "Michael, please tell me you got back to your hotel safely." Sarah: "I know you're angry. I know I hurt you, but this isn't you. Please respond." Sarah: "Alex called the police. They're looking for you. Just tell me you're okay, and I'll tell them you left." His blood ran cold. The police. Of course they'd called the police. He'd shown up across state lines, followed them, confronted them in public with his hand in his pocket. That person with the phone camera had probably posted the video already. He searched Twitter, Wicker Park confrontation, and his stomach dropped. The video was grainy but clear enough, posted 3 hours ago by Chicago Nightlife, with the caption, "Stalker ex-boyfriend confronts couple outside Italian restaurant. Dude kept his hand in his pocket the whole time. Scary AF. Oh, Wicker Park. Whoa, Chicago." It had 4,000 retweets. The comments were brutal. "This is how women get killed. Someone get his name and employer. This man is dangerous. The way he's gripping something in his pocket. He definitely had a weapon. A trans person was so brave standing in front of their girlfriend. Hope they're safe." Michael's hands shook as he scrolled through hundreds of comments dissecting his words, his body language, his apparent intentions. Internet detectives were already trying to identify him. Someone had enhanced the video and posted screenshots of his face from different angles. His phone rang. Unknown number with a Chicago area code. "Mr. Schneider?" A professional male voice. "This is Detective James Morrison with the Chicago Police Department. We'd like to speak with you regarding an incident tonight in Wicker Park." Michael's throat went dry. What incident?" "Sir, we have video evidence and witness statements placing you at the scene of a threatening confrontation. We'd like you to come to the station voluntarily to provide your statement." "Where are you currently located?" Every instinct screamed at him to lie, to hang up, to drive to the airport and flee back to Toronto. But running would only confirm their suspicions, would transform him from a heartbroken man who'd made bad decisions into an actual fugitive. "I'm at the airport Marriott," he said quietly. "Room 347. Stay there. Officers will be there in 20 minutes to escort you to the station. Do not leave the hotel, Mr. Schneider. That would be inadvisable." The line went dead. Michael looked at the knife on the nightstand. Evidence, proof of intent. He could throw it away, claim it never existed, but the video showed his hand in his pocket, showed him gripping something with clear, threatening intent. If they searched his room, and they would, an empty knife sheath in his luggage would be just as damning. He called the one person he trusted with legal matters, his older brother David, a corporate lawyer in Vancouver. "Michael, it's 2 a.m. What's wrong?" The whole story tumbled out. Sarah's affair, the Instagram messages, the trip to Chicago, the confrontation, the knife he'd almost used. David listened without interruption, and Michael could hear the disappointment and fear in his brother's silence. "Jesus Christ, Mike, tell me you didn't hurt anyone." "I didn't. I walked away, but I brought a knife. I had it in my pocket during the confrontation. Someone filmed it. The police are coming." "Okay, listen to me very carefully." Ira David's voice shifted into lawyer mode. "Do not say anything to the police without a lawyer present. Not one word beyond confirming your identity. You're Canadian, you're in the US, and you're potentially looking at stalking charges at minimum. If they ask about a weapon, do not answer. Understand? But I didn't actually do anything. You crossed state lines to confront someone who'd blocked you online while carrying a concealed weapon. Michael, that's federal territory. Possible interstate stalking, cyber stalking, weapons charges. You need to shut up and lawyer up immediately." 15 minutes later, 2 Chicago police officers knocked on his hotel room door. They were professional, almost gentle, but the handcuffs they placed on his wrists were real enough. As they led him through the hotel lobby, other guests stared. Michael saw himself through their eyes, a disheveled man in handcuffs at 3 a.m. being taken away by police. Dangerous, threatening, criminal. In the police car, Michael watched the Chicago streets pass by and wondered how his life had collapsed so completely in just 10 days. 10 days ago, he'd been in a relationship, had a stable job, a predictable future. Now he was in handcuffs in a foreign country, facing potential federal charges, his face viral on social media as an example of toxic masculinity and dangerous obsession. At the police station, they placed him in an interrogation room, stark, cold, exactly like in the movies. Detective Morrison entered with a female partner, Detective Sarah Chen. The irony of her name wasn't lost on Michael. "Mr. Schneider," Morrison began, sliding a paper across the table. "This is a still frame from a video taken tonight. That's you, correct?" Michael looked at his own face, frozen in a moment of rage and desperation. His hand was clearly in his pocket, his expression threatening. "I want a lawyer," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. Morrison nodded, unsurprised. "Smart choice. For what it's worth, Mr. Schneider, I've seen a lot worse than a heartbroken guy making bad decisions. But you brought a weapon to a confrontation with someone who'd rejected you. That's where you crossed a line we can't ignore." They left him alone in the room, and Michael put his head in his hands. Through the walls, he could hear muffled voices, ringing phones, the machinery of justice processing his mistake. His phone, still somehow in his possession, buzzed with a text from Sarah. "I told them you're not dangerous, that you've never been violent. I'm sorry it came to this, Michael. I really am. Too little, too late." The machinery was already in motion, and Michael Schneider, rational, predictable, safe Michael Schneider, had no idea how to stop it. The lawyer David arranged arrived at 6 a.m. Jennifer Walsh was a Chicago-based criminal defense attorney specializing in interstate cases. Expensive, but David had insisted on paying. She was in her late 40s, with sharp eyes that assessed Michael in seconds. "Tell me everything," she said, sitting across from him in the consultation room. "And I mean everything. I can't help you if you lie to me." Michael walked her through the entire sequence of events. She took notes, her expression neutral until he mentioned the knife. "Did you threaten them with it, pull it out, gesture toward it?" "No, I just had my hand in my pocket. I never took it out. I never even really intended to use it. I just—" "Stop." Walsh held up her hand. "Don't finish that sentence. Not to me, not to anyone. Intent is what separates a bad decision from a felony. Right now, we can argue you brought a knife to an unfamiliar city for personal protection. Stupid, but not criminal on its own. But the video shows a man having an emotional confrontation with his ex-girlfriend and her new partner. Your hand in your pocket could be anything. Keys, phone, cold hands. Unless someone can prove you had a weapon and intended to use it as a threat, it's circumstantial." Michael felt a flicker of hope. So, I might be okay? Walsh's expression hardened. Okay? No, Mr. Schneider, you're not okay. You flew across state lines to confront someone who'd blocked you online. There are multiple witnesses and video evidence. At minimum, you're looking at stalking charges, possibly harassment. Illinois has strict anti-stalking laws, and the fact that Alex is transgender adds a potential hate crime enhancement if prosecutors want to push it. What? No! This wasn't about, I don't care that Alex is trans. This was about the affair, the lies. What you care about and what prosecutors can argue are different things. The optics are terrible. Cisgender man tracks down his ex-girlfriend's trans partner and confronts them aggressively at night. That's a prosecutor's dream in the current climate. Michael's head spun, but Sarah told them, I'm not dangerous. Her testimony will help, but it doesn't erase what you did. However, there's good news. Alex and Sarah don't want to press charges. They just want you to stay away from them, permanently. I will. God, I just want to go home and forget this ever happened. Walsh leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to negotiate with the DA's office. Best case scenario, you plead guilty to disorderly conduct, get a restraining order requiring you to stay 500 feet from both Alex and Sarah, pay a fine, possibly some community service. You go back to Canada with a misdemeanor on your record. And worst case? Felony stalking, weapons charges if they find that knife in your hotel room, potential jail time, permanent record that destroys your career in tech, and immigration consequences that could bar you from ever entering the US again. They found the knife, of course. Hotel security had searched his room with police present and found it wrapped in a towel at the bottom of his luggage. The discovery made Walsh's job significantly harder. By noon, after 6 hours of negotiation, Walsh returned with a deal. Aggravated harassment, enhanced misdemeanor, 6 months probation, $5,000 fine, mandatory anger management counseling, 5-year restraining order against both victims. You'll have a criminal record, but it's not a felony. The DE wanted more, but Sarah's testimony about your character and lack of prior history helped. What about my job? Travel? You'll need to report this to your employer. Many tech companies have morality clauses. As for travel, the US might flag you at the border in the future, especially given the restraining order. You should assume your easy cross-border movement is over. Michael signed the papers with shaking hands. Outside the police station in the cold February morning, Walsh gave him one final piece of advice. Get therapy, Mr. Schneider. Real therapy. Because whatever broke in you that made this seem like a good idea, it needs to be fixed before you hurt someone or yourself. Toronto. 1 week later, Michael sat in his apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes. His employer had terminated him, not for the criminal charge itself, but for violating company values and creating a hostile environment. Someone had sent HR the viral video. His co-workers had seen it. Some had defended him. Most had stayed silent. His social media accounts were deactivated after the harassment became overwhelming. Strangers had found his LinkedIn, his Facebook, his Instagram. The comments ranged from typical toxic male to graphic threats against his life. Someone had created a Twitter thread documenting his dangerous behavior, complete with speculation about past relationships and completely fabricated stories from anonymous sources. David visited every day, bringing food and making sure Michael was still functional. You need to leave Toronto, his brother said gently. Too many people know your face now. Start over somewhere smaller, quieter. Sarah had texted once. I never wanted this for you. I'm sorry for how I handled everything. I hope you find peace. He hadn't responded. What was there to say? At night, Michael replayed the confrontation endlessly. What if he'd just confronted Sarah in Toronto? What if he'd never brought the knife? What if he'd simply accepted the breakup like a rational adult and moved on? But beneath those questions was a darker one. What if he'd actually used the knife? The thought terrified him, because for one brief moment on that Chicago street, it had felt possible. The rage had been that complete, that consuming. Walsh had been right. Something in him had broken. And now, sitting in his empty apartment with his career destroyed, his reputation ruined, and his future uncertain, Michael finally understood the cost of letting that darkness take control. His phone buzzed with a reminder. First anger management session tomorrow at 2 p.m. It was a start, maybe not toward the life he'd planned, but toward becoming someone who wouldn't make the same mistakes again. Michael Schneider had always been a rational man. He'd just learned the hardest way possible what happens when rationality fails. Michael stood in the small apartment he'd rented in Kingston, Ontario, 3 hours from Toronto, far enough to disappear. The anger management classes had ended, but the therapy continued. Dr. Rachel Patel had helped him understand what he'd refused to see. His obsession with control, his inability to process rejection, the warning signs he'd ignored in himself. "You didn't fall apart because Sarah left, Dr. Patel had explained during one session. You fell apart because you'd built your entire identity around being the stable one, the rational one. When that illusion shattered, you had nothing left to hold on to." He worked remotely now for a small startup that had taken a chance on him despite his record. The pay was half what he'd earned before, but it was honest work. His co-workers didn't know his story. He intended to keep it that way. The viral video had mostly faded from the internet, replaced by newer outrages, fresher scandals. Occasionally someone would recognize him. A double take at the grocery store, whispers at a coffee shop. He'd learned to live with it. David called every Sunday. "You sound better," his brother said during their last conversation. "Clearer." "I'm trying," Michael replied. "Some days are harder than others." He'd learned that Sarah and Alex had moved to Portland, starting fresh themselves. He felt nothing when he heard the news. No anger, no longing, just a distant acknowledgement that they existed somewhere, living lives that no longer intersected with his. The knife sat in an evidence locker in Chicago, a reminder he'd never reclaim. He was glad. That object had represented the worst version of himself, the person he'd almost become in a moment of blind rage. On his bathroom mirror, Michael had taped a quote from his therapist. "Healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about accepting who you were and choosing who you'll become." He read it every morning, a reminder that the person who'd flown to Chicago with violence in his heart didn't have to be who he was now. Michael Schneider would never be that rational, predictable man again. But maybe, with time and work, he could become something better. Someone who understood that strength wasn't about control, but about knowing when to walk away. The path forward was long and uncertain. But for the first time in 6 months, Michael believed he might actually make it.